Alright, this is Dwar MMA with Valdwar, and welcome to my first ever commentary video. I'm just going to be going over some of the things that interested me from UFC 283 in Rio. Pretty simple and straightforward, so let's just dive right in. At the top of the card, of course, Jamal Hill. Hill looked a lot better than I thought he would. I picked Glover, full transparency. I picked Glover to win. I knew Hill could win, but he still looked better than I thought. He showed great first and second layer takedown defense, which was, the big issue coming into the fight. He got taken down by Thiago Santos, not a wrestler, but in hindsight we can say, well, he was surprised by that, and with better preparation for wrestling, he was able to defend him better. If Glover had maybe chained his takedowns together better, like kept the body lock, looked for a second or third attempt after maneuvering to a favorable clinch position, maybe he could have gotten the fight to the mat earlier, and he did do that later. He got takedowns in round 3 and 5 with something along those lines, but by that point he was, beaten up badly, and he had to rush his top game because he was desperate for the finish after being down on the scorecards. Hill took advantage of that and did great to escape some really bad positions. He did get, put in those bad positions, so his guard was a bit sketchy. So I'm still wary of his grappling, but it's light heavyweight. Not many light heavyweights are going to be able to even try and take advantage of that. I am worried about his cage craft on the feet, because even when he was totally dominating Glover, he was beating him up for a full minute straight in the 4th round, and then after he kind of stopped, Glover was still able to just push him back to the fence. He would back himself up to the fence, without even being pushed back, without even facing, actual pressure, just kind of backed up naturally far too often. And someone like Jiri can make him pay for that pretty badly. Overall, his striking looked great, though, a lot of variety and volume, and he's definitely proven himself to be a legitimate top 5 light heavyweight. A lot of people won't want to admit that, and I can see why, I guess, but it's still important to evaluate fighters' skill sets honestly, regardless of what we think about them, regardless about his comments that have made some waves on Twitter and social media about what he said about domestic abuse, Dana White and Andrew Tate. But the analytical game's about being honest with it, regardless of our personal feelings. I don't think he's the best light heavyweight in the world. Jiri is still the lineal champ, of course, and we should regard him as the best light heavyweight in the world right now, but Hill did prove a lot in this fight. I'm very excited to see him and Jiri soon, hopefully. Jan, Rakic, and Goliath in the future would all be great fights that I hope we do also see. And there's a couple further down the road, maybe, that we can look forward to, like Jailton Almeida, who I'll talk about later. The problem right now, though, is that the belt at light heavyweight just seems to lack legitimacy, just like the heavyweight belt will, no matter who holds it next. Jamal silenced some of those concerns with this impressive performance, but still, the way that this fight even happened, with him getting a title shot only because Jiri got injured, was forced to vacate. I don't believe he just chose to vacate, but that's a topic for another time about the behind-the-scenes business. But then Jan and Ank having a draw, and Dana getting so mad at that he didn't want them to rematch for the belt. He didn't like the way the fight went, so he just booked this fight. It's not a great look for the idea that the UFC tries to promote, that it's a meritocracy, that the ranking system, the belt system is a meritocracy. That idea has been undermined consistently over the last few years, and now even more with recent events with Ngannou and Jiri. If he does fight Jiri next, I will pick Jiri to win, but Hill could absolutely pull it off. It'd be probably a great fight, probably a fight of the night. It's hard to see that fight being anything but crazy or an early knockout potentially. Alright, so Brandon Moreno, who is one of my favorite fighters, but I still like Figgy, quite a lot. They're both very fun, and Moreno looked great. His game plan for this fight was obviously much different than past fights, and it was really smart, with his new coach, Saif Saeed, deserving a lot of credit for that. Despite Brandon coming in with a knee injury, he attempted and landed some great takedowns. That was the one big adjustment that made him look so great in this fight, that made him look clearly, not dominant necessarily, but a step above Figgy. Figgy also did some good things off his back in the grappling, like going for the heel hook and the 2 sweeps he performed to get Moreno off him, but Moreno was able to keep going back to the wrestling. And he found that if he could settle the position, not have Figgy wriggling, not have Figgy wriggling and scrambling around to try to get up, that he could control him and win rounds effectively, and it worked. He also looked pretty good on the feet. Like, he had to establish that before he could just shoot for takedowns, and it worked. I mean, he was winning on the feet too. He outlanded and out-volumed a lower volume version of Figgy than we've seen in the past, which his volume has dropped off kind of each fight over the quadrilogy. But Moreno just didn't get hit that much. Figgy only landed 19 significant strikes on 43 attempts during a 15-minute fight where just over 6 minutes were spent on the feet. So that's barely 3 significant strikes landed per minute. I mean, I think there is an element of Figueiredo aging since the first fight here, but I don't think he's like totally past it. I mean, it's still a great win for someone's resume, anyone's resume. I didn't like Moreno backing himself up to the fence so much, but he was sharp enough to make it work by being faster and landing good strikes, avoiding a lot of the power Figgy threw, avoiding the few leg kicks that Figgy threw, which were a big problem in the third fight for Moreno. He adjusted his stance, so yeah, he kind of improved in all facets. There were obviously some interesting moments. I think they were well matched in the grappling department, but back to that, it's just the wrestling was the key. The wrestling department is where Moreno, did so much better and was able to win with control and takedowns, and that's what it boils down to. I'm really looking forward to Moreno's fight with Pantoja next. I think Moreno's physicality and wrestling have progressed a lot since his fights with Pantoja in the past. And at this stage, I think he represents a pretty tough stylistic matchup. And I would favor him slightly over Pantoja for the trilogy. Or the rematch, I guess, whatever you want to call it. Because they will probably call it a rematch on the broadcast when it happens. Because last time they thought it was an exhibition. I fully expected Gilbert to beat Neil Magny, but I did not think he would make it look that easy. I mean, we haven't really seen him use his jiu-jitsu like that for a long time. He wrestled Wonder Boy, he wrestled and grappled Konchenko and Gunnar Nelson a bit, and he wrestled Woodley a bit, but then he hasn't really had a submission since Mike Davis at lightweight in 2019. He's been using his striking a lot more, like against Maia and Usman and Khamzat Chimaev. And Mike Davis, who he submitted with a rear naked choke in 2019, is a great fighter, but doing this to Neil Magny is significantly more impressive. Other guys who were able to do it to Magny are like Shavkat in 2022, RDA back in 2017, and Demian Maia all the way back in 2015. Like RDA especially did it similarly with a first round arm triangle. But people don't really think of Gilbert as an MMA wrestler and grappler on the same level as guys like Maia and Shavkat especially, despite Gilbert's, BJJ accomplishments. He's definitely impressed with defensive grappling and toughness and striking and all kinds of things against Khamzat, but it's still a loss. So I was personally not thinking of Gilbert in the immediate title picture, but now I am. I mean, it might just have been Magny, who's like a gatekeeper, a mid-level ranked guy, but the way he did it puts him right up there with Bilal and kind of behind Khamzat, of course, but right up there with Bilal, who is on a great winning streak, would be a great option to fight next. Personally, though, I think Bilal and Khamzat is the title eliminator, or the number one contender fight to make for who fights the winner of the Leon and Usman trilogy. And then Burns and Colby behind that would be a bit of a title eliminator, though we'll see if Colby's going to fight. I mean, it kind of doesn't look like it at this point. We'll see. But then you have Shavkat, who's fighting Jeff Neal soon, of course, UFC 285, I believe. And so if Shavkat wins that, then Burns and Shavkat would make a lot of sense. The problem is they both train at Killcliff. It's a bit of a conundrum there for them. But they aren't I don't believe they're best friends. Like Luque and Gilbert Burns are like brothers. Like they're like this. So they'll never fight each other. But it's possible that Shavkat and Burns would. I mean, Usman and Burns did. So we'll see. We'll see. But that'd be a great fight to have in the future also. The Bonfin Brothers are the latest to make waves in a tradition of brothers fighting in UFC that extends way, way back to the beginning, starting with the Shamrock Brothers, then the Diazes, the Lozons, and so on. And now we have the Bonfins and also the Basharats leading the way, and both those pairs came out the Contender Series recently. In the case of the Bonfins, they both came in on the same card in 2022, and then this UFC Rio event was their promotional debut. I mean, the younger brother Gabriel, I think, has a few more flaws than Ismail. He tends to wing hooks while running forward, being too ultra aggressive, when some strategy and straight hitting and patience would serve him better. But it has worked well for him so far, and I believe it'll continue to work a while longer, as welterweight is much weaker than lightweight, his brother's division. While winging those hooks, he did get the finish against Munir Lazez, who's a solid fighter, but it didn't teach us that much new about him. He was so aggressive, which can maybe partially because of the way his brother won in the earlier fight. He wanted to, continue that, do something equally impressive. But early on, he missed a lot of the strikes against Lazez while being really aggressive. But Munir just then shot the takedown to relieve that relentless pressure being sent his way. And it was just not smart. He's not a wrestler, really. And Gabriel has great submissions to fall back on, which he did. He got the finish. Quick finish for his debut. I'll be watching closely in his next fight because I want to learn more. I want to see how deep his game actually is. We just haven't seen enough yet. Now, Ismail really has the potential to go all the way to the top, I think. And we can see that in him currently. We could see it before this fight when he fought a really tough opponent on the Contender Series and had a great performance, in a tough fight where he had to dig deep for 15 minutes. My buddy Zach Harkness on Twitter did a great thread about Ismail against McKinney, which everyone should check out for a clip-by-clip breakdown of what happened. But in general, the fight was telegraphed by Terrence, telegraphing lazy strikes for the most part, while Ismail could see them coming and counter effectively. His accuracy was insane. He was really sharp. He could not miss McKinney's chin and body. He went 34 out of 49 overall with significant strikes, which is an absurd accuracy. Well above 50%, and he mixed between the body and head perfectly evenly. We still need to see more, of course, but he seems like a very, very intelligent striker. Could use maybe a bit more straight hitting and less hooks. He does get a bit hooky at times, but he's not nearly as big an offender as his brother is in that regard. He's well-rounded, and I believe he'll eventually be in the top 15. He could maybe even be a title contender. I'm just not sure yet. I need to see a bit more, but his last two fights, very promising. I'm very excited. Like many others who watched Dana White's Contender Series, I was high on Jailton Almeida coming into the UFC, and even more so after his first two fights, saw him continue that dominance and finishing ability on the mat. But I do believe people are getting ahead of themselves. People are talking about heavyweight champ and stuff, and he has major holes he needs to address, mainly in the striking. He looks extremely uncomfortable on the feet for any length of time, so the first person who can really stop his takedowns will have him in trouble. The thing about Jailton is, now that he's fighting at heavyweight, that might not happen for a while. In the mid-level of heavyweight, you have Romanov, Spivak, Tybura, who are all decent enough wrestlers, but if he fights guys like Daukaus and Jairzinho, he could just blow through to the top 5 before he gets a challenge. But there, he'll meet Blades and Aspinall, guys like that, who I don't see him having a chance against. He's just too small, can't strike like those guys. I don't see how he's going to become heavyweight champion. So I think he should move back down to light heavyweight and put some striking work in, because there aren't the same level of wrestlers at light heavyweight. Only Ankalaev is a really, really great wrestler at the top end of light heavyweight, so he could blow right through to the title. Theoretically, he could beat Hill, he could beat Jiri with just his wrestling and grappling, but I don't think those fights would go well for him right now either as it stands. But he has a lot of potential. It's fun to watch him. And I'll keep rooting for him as he keeps going up the ladder, which I think he will. Okay, now Johnny Walker. I personally don't love the new SPGI, John Kavanagh coach Johnny Walker. Sure, he got another meme KO, and it was entertaining in the end, but the wild way he used to fight kind of maximized his chances of getting that KO. He still has the same issues from the Santos fight in this fight. That fight, he did nothing for 25 minutes. Those issues still exist, because he just kind of stood there until Paul Craig kind of came to him, until they came together. Paul Craig tried to grab his leg and he bonked him. But he can be drawn into being too patient and he does not have enough depth in his striking to fight from range. Like, and as seen against Jamal Hill, his defense and especially his chin are still extremely suspect. So kind of going forward aggressively and trying to knock out people, especially when he's fighting like, mid-tier light heavyweights and not the elite level light heavyweights, that hides his defensive flaws somewhat and maximizes his chances of getting a knockout. Staying back, he can be drawn into fighting a really, really bad fight where no one's happy, the fans aren't happy, and he probably loses a decision like he did against Santos unless he gets a knockout at some point. I mean, Craig is not the type of guy who can make him pay for all that, but there are guys at light heavyweight who aren't the elite fighters who can make him pay for that, and yeah, it's not good. Bruno Ferreira against Gregory Rodriguez, my guy, of course. I mean, Bruno is a tank, both in his physical build and in his fight style. I mean, he hits hard as hell. He was stepping on a short notice, and he's a southpaw, which is a big deal against a guy who's preparing for an orthodox fighter, and he just knocked him out. I mean, Gregory's still, of course, my guy, my number one violence weight fighter of 2022, and I stand by that fully. I mean, this doesn't change anything about that for me. My opinion of him has not changed. He's still a highly entertaining fighter with extreme offensive capabilities and a lot of flaws too. I mean, flawed Brazilian action fighter. It's part of the job description for guys like that. I mean, it sucks. It sucks for him. He was set to fight Brad Tavares, maybe enter the top 15 with a win, and now he's just lost to a debuting Contender Series fighter. So it sucks, but I mean, he'll build up his way back up. I'm confident he'll go on to have a lot more entertaining fights and some good wins too, and maybe some bad losses. I mean, that, like I said, part of the job description. I'm excited to see what we can see next. I mean, yeah, I feel for the guy though. And then the last fighter I'm really going to talk about is Cody Stevens. I mean, Cody Stevens like a fringe top 15 bantamweight contender. But this fight wasn't what I wanted to see from him. I mean, he looked good when he did the things he should be doing, but he also looked bad. Equal parts good and bad in that fight. His boxing was slick, in the pocket especially. Really slick. Really good stuff. He hit the body well. He was making the guy miss while, right in his face and then hitting him back. But for much of the fight, he just bounced around on the outside against Lacerda, who's a fighter that I am convinced Cody Stevens is much, much better than. Only in the second round and a bit at the end of the first did he really press his advantages, use his boxing, use his volume and high pace. Then his coaches told him he was 2 up, which he may not have been, so he coasted the third and it could have lost him the fight. I mean, I personally did score rounds 1 and 2 for Cody, but a lot of people did not give him round 1. And it's hard to blame him, really. I mean, it was closer, much closer than it should have been. So, I assume he'll fight, not a debuting fighter next, a better fighter, and we'll see if he can, make the changes to his game that I think he should make, that I think he should have been employing there and maximize his advantages, cardio, pace, maybe some wrestling. Whenever he got this guy to the ground, he just let him back up. So, we'll see. I don't really have that much to say about Andrade, but I mean, I had to include her in this video. I expected her to look great, and she exceeded my expectations. I mean, she deserves the next strawweight title shot, in my opinion, just based on the Lemos win and her history in the division. But this is a flyweight fight, which makes it all very confusing. We'll just have to see. I have no idea what she's doing right now or what her management wants her to do, but I do know she's the only current non-champ ranked in 2 weight classes right now, and I do know also that she is now tied for the most UFC women's wins in history, and it's a well-deserved honor. She's one of the most exciting and violent women ever. So, obviously, the crowd at UFC Rio was not the best. I mean, we're used to the Uvai Moreira and stuff like that, aggressive Brazilian crowds, but this is another level. I mean, an unacceptable level. I mean, throwing stuff at Moreno obviously is the worst of it. Yeah, but there was also a lot of issues on the side of the UFC that led to what happened with the crowd of this event that I just feel I have to touch on. I mean, it's not their fault, but they exacerbated it. They, fed into it with some of the decisions they made for this event. I mean, the crowd was completely unacceptable. Again, completely unacceptable. But yeah, the UFC made their bad behavior even worse. I mean, this is a crowd that had been drinking since the prelims began at 7 p.m. 7 p.m. I mean, usually in a United States pay-per-view, if it's East Coast, it begins at like 5 p.m. If it's West Coast, it begins at like 2 p.m. Because then the main card starts at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Pacific Time. But here, the main card did not start until midnight. I mean, American sports fans, they'll leave the arena if their team is down badly. I mean, that's just normal. In MMA, of course, it's a bit different because a win can happen at any second. But when the 25 minutes had passed and Glover didn't get the finish to come from behind, he wasn't going to win. They knew he wasn't going to win, so they left. I mean, that part is kind of understandable. It was after 2 o'clock a.m. in Brazil. There was no bus, no train access to the stadium, and Uber fares were hiked to at least 3 times the price. I mean, this is according to my friend who lives in Brazil. When I went to UFC Long Island, shout out to Will, by the way. When I went to UFC Long Island, for example, an Uber for me and my friends to go about 3 miles from the stadium to my friend's house after the fight, where I was staying, cost over $90. And that was only at like 4 in the afternoon because that was like a midday card. The fans just wanted to get out of the stadium because waiting longer could cost them a lot of time and a lot of money when they were tired and drunk. I mean, this is on top of the cost of between $500 and $1,100. I mean, $500 for the worst seats, $1,100 around on average. Brazilian reais, I think that's how you say it, for tickets. When the average monthly income in Brazil is just 1,300 reais. And you can't just buy one ticket. Usually they make you buy 2 together on most sites like Access. So there's absolutely no excuse for throwing things at Moreno. Again, no excuse as he left after beating Figgy. But the UFC made the situation worse by scheduling the fight for such a late time. It was 2 hours later in the Rio time zone than it was on the East Coast in America. So why could they not just have pushed back the start time 2 hours in America? It would still have been, a primetime event, 8 o'clock start time East Coast, and I'd argue that time would be even better for East Coast UFC fans, as we would not have to stay up to midnight, but rather 10 or 11 p.m. for, the main card. The big question here, of course, moving forward, is what the time locally will be like for the pay-per-view in London in March. I mean, in the past, the UFC has scheduled London pay-per-views for really, really early, like horrendously early times in the morning, so they can still fit the prime time spot. I mean, that Bisping pay-per-view in London was at a horrendous time for the British fans. I mean, and then this time around, tickets are not as cheap as £100, which they have been in the past in London. But they start at $200, at least, and those seats apparently were gone right away. I mean, most of them were gone before the pre-sale even started, according to what I've been reading. Mid-level seats are about $400 yesterday, which is 2 days ago from when this video is published. So, the 25th, January 25th, the cheapest seats available were £332. That's triple, what they were for the same seats in London for the Woodley versus Leon Edwards event that was canceled in 2020. And for that price, fans still might have to wake up at 2 o'clock a.m., 3 o'clock a.m., midnight even, to get to the stadium. I mean, UFC Rio was the first pay-per-view or live event in general to not sell out since the return to live events after COVID. So if this trend continues, even for a big trilogy like Usman versus Edwards, then who knows what the crowd will look like, who knows how rowdy they'll be, and how upset they'll be.
Hey, this is Val. As I'm just finishing up editing, and I wanted to say thanks for all the support, both with words of encouragement and just listening to what I have to say about MMA in general on Twitter and such. I mean, this video is a really, really rough debut. I'm just trying to get this thing going, and now that I've done this, I have some idea how it all works, how to script a video, how to edit it, where to insert what, how to fit it all together. I'll learn a lot more, but this feels like a good starting place. Don't take this video as like a finished product or anything. I made a lot of mistakes in it, but I knew I had to get it out today or the event would just be too far in the past to like really have it be worth anything. But I mean, yeah, thanks again to anyone tuning in. Don't worry about like sharing or shouting it out or anything. If you were going to do that, then just save it for a better one in the future. This is just to get it going. And if not, then no worries. Anyway, I love all my MMA Twitter friends, and a favela venceu. I probably said that wrong.